Sing it. Sing. The car. The car. The car. The car. The car. Plenty of time. Car. Car. The car. Oh, come on! I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
What did you think about the movie A Fish Called Wanda? I know when Ken first came in and started to stutter, I laughed.
Well, I must confess I laughed too, but I felt a bit guilty when I was laughing. Although, you know, on the other hand, See No Evil, Hear No Evil with Richard Pryor and Gene Wilder, I didn't feel guilty laughing at that movie at all.
Fuzzy Wuzzy was a woman?
What the hell is he talking about?
He reads lips. You're talking too fast.
Was there a woman present?
Yes, there was a woman present.
Why is he talking like that?
Because he's deaf, not stupid.
The way we see each other is profoundly influenced by the movies. Indians, blacks, women, Jews, Arabs, Chinese, to name only some, have felt, and in many cases still feel, the lash of Hollywood's stereotyping. So do people with disabilities.
Almost from the beginning, motion pictures have included people with disabilities, very often in leading roles. But the depiction has only rarely been accurate. People with disabilities have frequently been portrayed as frightening, intellectually inferior, even as freaks. Hello, I'm Susan Pettit.
And I'm Joe Coughlin. Welcome to a special edition of the Disability Network. DNet Goes to the Movies.
Merry Christmas! Merry Christmas! Thank you very much! Vietnam did this to me!
Everything will be cool.
Let the boom!
Like nobody in the fucking hospital!
To find out how people with disabilities feel about the way they're treated in films, we invited 9 movie buffs to meet us at a local video store.
Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure. It's good to be here.
The movies that stuck in my mind as old films that portrayed individuals that were disabled were Johnny Belinda and also the Helen Keller story.
Oh, Helen Keller.
I was surprised that didn't come out that
Do you know
What's the reaction when you guys go into a movie theater? Do people give you the gears, or?
I don't think we get that much.
The first topic of discussion, the highly controversial film, A Fish Called Wanda.
George back yet?
No, he had to go to the
Well, that's quite a stutter you've got there, Ken. It's all right. It doesn't bother me. So, George needs a weapons man, eh?
There were some people who found that the portrayal of Ken was rather negative in terms of assumptions that we have about the personalities of people who stutter. Stuttering is still one of those areas where people feel that it's perfectly okay to make fun of people who stutter. In terms of laughter, I think that it's obviously quite possible for people to have, or it's quite possible to have a character who is amusing, and we can certainly laugh at a person, but not because they happen to have a disability.
If there were many roles for people that stuttered, many roles, if you saw this a lot in television and film, it wouldn't be a problem. But because you see it so rarely to stereotype the person, it's really unfortunate.
I think a large part of it is that a person who stutters is not a very visible minority, and as far as disability is concerned. You don't see them on the street, whatever. You can't see a person that stutters, and I think that barrier, it makes it hard for people to understand that stuttering is considered as a disability in itself. So people who don't laugh at the other ones, for instance, a blind person or a person in a wheelchair, they can see them. So it makes a big difference.
One of the major aspects of stuttering is that if a person has had difficulties in speaking for a long time, often the way that they respond to that is by not speaking at all. So I think it's very important for listeners and for people who stutter to talk much more about stuttering.
With respect to humor and disability, I think we've seen a lot of pictures that depict people with disabilities in a humorous light. Let's take, for example, See No Evil, Hear No Evil. Is there something to be said about these types of films?
I think in some respects it's great that we can laugh. But I think laughter can also lead to a lot of misconceptions in terms of people with disabilities. I think sometimes it can be really hurtful and harmful because again we're being ridiculed and we're only being seen as fun-loving, happy people. But in some respects we have anger, emotion, and other emotions instead of laughter. And I'm sick and tired in some cases of being the butt of everybody's jokes or the brunt of everybody's jokes just because I have a disability, or in the case of stuttering, just because I stutter.
I really like the use of humor in some films and some TV shows I've seen. Now, the odd time it's really inappropriate and you don't feel good about it, but I remember Night Court, which is a very popular TV show, had a blind woman portrayed. And she was mean and nasty, and she swung her cane around and knocked everybody over and screamed at everyone. And at the end, they said, it's really too bad she went blind and this happened to her and she's so mean. And the guy said, oh, no, she was much nicer before. She was worse before she was blind. She's mellowed out. And I sat there and I thought, what a riot. And that particular show has had several disabled characters, and they just blow the stereotypes away. And I myself use a lot of humor, and people just sort of go, oh, you cannot be humorous about being in a chair. It's almost sacrilegious. Well, you can be, and why not? When it's appropriate.
If people are uncomfortable with your disability, if you are able to make a joke about it, then that shows them that you're comfortable with the fact that you're disabled, and then they begin to overcome their feelings, and then the stereotypes are gradually eliminated.
I find if you can break that barrier in an office setting or social setting or whatever, it makes it a lot easier to work with fellow workers, and they're not so sensitive about saying things. For me in particular, did you watch a certain film or did you see something on TV last night? A lot of people have trouble with those words, watch, see, look. I don't know what they expect. It'd be difficult to feel a film on TV, wouldn't it? There's a glass there, and you can't get through it.
Don't guide me. Don't guide me.
What?
Don't guide me. They're looking for a blind guy and a deaf guy. We just gotta get out of the neighborhood.
You won't make it half a block. You'll crack your head open.
Not if you stamp your feet.
If I what?
Stamp your feet. I'll follow the sound.
You mean like this?
Louder. Stomp your feet. I can hear the noise. I'll follow you. That's good. Now move out.
Jesus.
We gotta find the subway.
I feel ridiculous.
You look fine to me.
I have decided that I do not wish to go on living like this, and so I would like to be discharged so that I could die. And you want me to represent you? Tough luck.
Well, Sue, it's clear that some movies are a little more controversial than others, and one that touched a nerve with our panel was Whose Life Is It Anyway? It stars Richard Dreyfuss. He's a quadriplegic who's fighting for the right to kill himself.
Oh, I remember that film, and that touches a key issue, I think, and brings close to home to the heart of disabled people, the right to live independently and have this freedom of choice, and not to be considered sick with constant need for medical care and supervision.
Here, I think this will help you.
Don't do that. Don't give me that.
Why not? It'll make you feel better.
Quieter, you mean? Now, you listen to me, Dr. Scott. The only thing that I have left is my consciousness. And I don't want that paralyzed as well. Do you understand that?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying.
Good. Very good. So if you want any tranquility, you eat the pill.
It created a lot of conflicts for me because on one hand I believe that this individual had the right to choose to die, and on the other hand I thought, maybe perhaps he can get on with his life and go on towards living a different lifestyle but being still fulfilled. And I thought it portrayed a viewpoint that all disabled people are going to want to die.
People who are newly paralyzed take anywhere from 6 months to a year just to learn how to adapt to their disability. And there's certainly a lot of changes they go through in that time, but you can still have a life.
His life was over as far as he was concerned because he was so helpless. His injury was so high that he couldn't have done it in any other way. So, I mean, it was a choice that I thought it was well made.
It wasn't even so much of not being able to use his hands. It was the lack of control, having control in his life. And I think that that was missed in many ways by a lot of able-bodied people who saw the film.
I have to disagree with the fact that people are saying that he wanted to die because of lack of control. He did not want to be a disabled person who had lost full use of his hands. It was because of the disability.
That's right.
And I think we have to accept that some disabled people do not want to live with that. Most of us do, some of us don't. That's his choice. And if non-disabled people see it as saying everyone wants to die, well, that's their problem. That certainly wasn't the point of the film.
In the 1950s and 60s, when a character with a disability showed up in the movie, it was always to inspire fear. In films, it seems that whenever someone was conducting a scientific experiment, there would be an accident and a freak would result. That is, a person disfigured in some way.
Take, for example, Dark Man, a movie that exploits the theme of physical changes to the face and body, changing the personality. It's another treatment of the Phantom of the Opera, the musical version of which still plays to full houses in Toronto.
I think probably that in many ways having a facial disability is probably the hardest disability to have because we judge people so much on the way they look. And society has been traditionally very harsh towards people that don't fit into the norm. That's exactly what we're discussing right now, the problems, how people perceive us because of our disability. And I think that that's probably the most difficult one to have. I think what we have to do is to reach people at a very young age. Sesame Street recently introduced a child with Down syndrome on the series. There's been a study done by psychologists around the country, and they found that non-disabled children respond more positively now towards people with Down syndrome. So I think if we can reach kids at an early age.
I think it's so true what you were saying, that we have to reach children. Obviously, we have to break some of these stereotypes. We have an example here of a stereotype where a facial disfigurement is a kind of metaphor for evil.
What we're always going to see Hollywood using a disability as facial disfigurement, whatever, as a driving force for somebody's madness or their thirst for revenge. Unfortunately, that's what we're seeing.
There is, however, some good news about people with disabilities in feature films. Take, for instance, Wait Until Dark, in which Audrey Hepburn plays a blind woman who is hunted by a killer. Here we see a disabled character who is in jeopardy, but far from helpless, although some people wouldn't agree with this interpretation. In A Bad Day at Black Rock, a one-armed Spencer Tracy demolished the villainous Ernest Borgnine. Borgnine and other bad guys had called Tracy a cripple one too many times.
Some recent films have given us award-winning performances when people with disabilities have been portrayed in positive, self-sufficient ways.
Deaf actress Marlee Matlin won a Best Actress Academy Award for her role in Children of a Lesser God, a film that debates the merits of signing or speaking.
The past two Academy Award winners for Best Actor went to film stars playing people with disabilities. Dustin Hoffman in Rain Man playing a man with autism. Daniel Day-Lewis in My Left Foot playing the role of Irish writer Christy Brown, who had cerebral palsy.
Competing against Lewis for the award was Tom Cruise for his portrayal of Ron Kovic in the film Born on the 4th of July.
I was pretty impressed with, say, Born on the 4th of July. It was hard-hitting, realistic, didn't hold anything back.
This wheelchair, our wheelchairs, this steel, our steel is your Memorial Day on wheels. We are your Yankee Doodle Dandy come home.
Plays the anger and emotion of a disability as opposed to just doesn't make a martyr out of the individual so much as shows them to have emotion and very real.
With all due respect to Brent's opinion, I felt Coming Home was a vastly superior film to Born on the 4th of July. Perhaps I have a different reason because when I was in my, I guess around 10, 11 years old, I was in a military hospital in the U.S., which was at the height of the Vietnam War, and I compared both movies very critically, and I would say without question it was far more authentic, and I also felt it gave more dignity to a person with a disability. It was a much more positive film.
Hi, I'm here to register my son for the 9th grade.
Mask in particular did portray a real realistic view of someone with facial disabilities, and it was quite weird how the setting was plot. The mother was very accepting of the son, and told him to get going, get on with his life. And also, I thought it was really good that they brought in the romantic side of the whole situation, where he did fall in love with this young woman, and the young woman's parents did not want this individual to see this particular individual because of the disability. I think it was really realistic.
When we order the pancakes, they're going to bring the maple syrup. Maple syrup is supposed to be on the table before the pancakes.
I saw the movie Rain Man, and I liked the movie. I thought the brother, when he got mad at Dustin Hoffman, that was okay, because he was sort of a pushy kind of guy who wasn't, wanted to help with disability. And then he got to know his brother and like him even more. But the ending shocked me. I mean, one, a group home situation was never mentioned. He could have built his own group home with $3 million. And it was like, he has to go back to this institution because they know him and love him there. He could have stayed in the same city, in a setting where he had help, support care. So, I mean, I thought the ending was just terrible.
He's probably going to want to take you back with him. You know? Yeah.
You know, the old movies that portray people with disabilities inappropriately never die. They just keep coming back again and again on television.
Late night reruns.
That's right. You know, it prompts a question to me. There's got to be something we can do about it.
Should anything be done about it?
I have a real concern that in old movies, the stereotypes about disabled people are even worse than today's new movies. You'll often see a disabled man or woman in a wheelchair, and certainly the wrong wheelchair that they never have, with a blanket over their legs. They're whining, crying, someone's pushing them off a cliff because they're so horrible to be with. And they keep rerunning these movies. So people are seeing this and they're going, oh, it must be still the same. And I don't know how you can solve it. I mean, either stop rerunning the most horrible of them, because some of them are so bad, they should not be shown.
I don't think censorship is the key. I think people should be taught that movies from a different era should be treated in the context that views have changed and aren't those necessarily of today.
Looming straight up and over us, like a solid iron figurehead suddenly thrust into our vision, stood Captain Ahab. His whole high, broad form weighed down upon a barbaric white leg carved from the jawbone of a whale.
One thing I think that we discovered that the members of our panel agreed that most people with disabilities don't want to be treated as something special, something apart.
Yeah, they don't want to be heroes or heroines or victims. They're people first.
Everyone.
Take it easy.
Give us another blast there, ready, Dan, brother, right? Terry, will you tell us about when you and the old fella carried the farming up the ladder, will you?
My left foot, you have a character who is a complete human being, and a disability is sort of one aspect of his personality. I think that comes across very strongly, and I think that's a kind of a model for how people who have disabilities should be portrayed in the media.
I agree. I think that's been the problem with a lot of the films that we've mentioned that we've liked, but and disliked, is that the focus has been on the disability. And here is a person who is actually more severely disabled than many of the characters that have already been mentioned in other films, and yet he was a fuller character. He's more fully developed.
And I don't think you need to pick superheroes. I mean, I think Rick Hansen did an amazing feat, but I'm not so sure a movie about him, I mean, it would just be about this superhuman disabled male who did this superhuman thing. But the more we're shown as human beings that do everyday things and also do some pretty impressive things, the better off everyone will be.
Well, Degrassi High is a good example. They now do have someone that's just there every day, and they're not focusing on the disability.
I'd like to mention that there was a stage play recently by the Canadian Stage Company which featured Tom Wood in the role of Alan Turing, who's a brilliant British mathematician who happens to stutter. And that stage play was very much like that film that we talked about earlier, My Left Foot, where the disability is not a central part of the play or the film, but certainly it's an element there, and it helps to displace or destroy some of the stereotypes and myths that we have about a condition like stuttering.
What is your reaction to people who aren't disabled portraying people with disabilities?
Obviously, there are certain roles, such as Born on the 4th of July, certain films that have been made where it would be impossible to cast a disabled person in the film because the person's ambulatory, according to script in the beginning. I don't have a problem with that. I also don't have a problem with a non-disabled actor portraying someone with a disability in every situation. However, I do have a problem with the fact that disabled actors are not being auditioned for those roles.
I think we have to be careful that a disabled monopoly doesn't exist or something like that, which restricts disabled actors into one area. Extreme stereotyping of that nature. I think the focus should always be on integration, and as long as that happens, I think there'll be a better understanding.
You know, things are changing, but we need more change. It's not happening as quickly as we'd like it to, but there's definite improvement.
The subject of people with disabilities in the movies is complex. It's not just a matter of who's on the screen and who's in the audience. It also involves those behind the camera.
Movies, after all, are only a mirror of society. We see our reflections in movies. People with disabilities are an important part of our society, but the reflection in movies is missing.
Where are the disabled actors, writers, directors, producers, and camera operators? There has been some progress, but much more has to be done. Only when people with disabilities are fully integrated into society, into life, will we be able to find their reflection in the movies.
We'd like to hear from our viewers, people with disabilities and without. What do you think about the way people with disabilities have been portrayed in films? Have any movies stood out in your mind? Any performances?
You can write to us at the Disability Network, Box 500, Station A, Toronto, M5W1E6, or send a message to us by fax machine. The number is 975-5636, area code 416. I'm Susan Pettit.
And I'm Joe Coughlin.
Well, at this early hour, I don't know.
He's still doing your interviews?
Oh, you're doing them very...
Mr. Ron! Mr. Ron! We can do a deal! I'll buy you a delicatessen in stainless steel!
All right, keep your hair on.
Put me down! Put me down!
Oh, you want to get off?